Hey guys, today I'm going to go over rods, and pretty complex subject in the fishing industry. If you've ever gone onto a tackle website and you're looking, it could be a little overwhelming. There's tons of different manufacturers, tons of different rods, there's all these ratings. A lot of people struggle with it, or it's hard to find exactly what you're looking for. So I'm here to help you try and streamline that process to get the information that you need and help compare it maybe to other brands and different rods, so you can pick what you need with less trial and error, and then hopefully find a rod company or a rod line that you really like, and then you can start kind of building up your arsenal to try and keep some consistency within your rods. The three major things that they're going to classify the rods with is going to be power, action, and length. I'll start off with power. Now, people get power and action confused a lot. Power is basically how heavy of a bait the rod manufacturer designed the rod for, and they can also rate it by line size as well. So this I'll use as an example. This is a Dobbins, and they have it heavy power, and it's rated for 1/4 to 1 ounce on lure weight. I don't know if you can see out that well. GoPro's kind of hard to focus in sometimes on that. And they also rate it from a 10 to 20 pound line. So that is the power of the rod. Now you have powers go all the way down. I'm just going to stick kind of the bass fishing in this aspect, and it's medium light to medium heavy to heavy to extra heavy. Sometimes I have things they call mag heavy on certain brands. The next thing I'll talk about is the action. So the action is how far down your rod loads up when you set the hook, when you cast. It's how far down into the blank the rod's going to load up. So this is a moderate action rod right here that I just picked up. This is my cranking rod, and you can see kind of how far down into the blank that's flexing. This is, I would consider, probably like a 60-40. So what I mean by that is you have 60% of your rod that is going to stay basically static. It's just backbone of the rod. And I have very, very little flex all the way through the blank, but it's mostly backbone to help you control the fish and help you work the lure that you're using. And then in this case, we'll just say 40%. So about in this area here is really where it starts to load up. If I'm throwing the crankbait, this part's really going to have all the flex in it. You're really going to be able to get a nice parabolic bend down into this portion of the rod. So that is a little bit of an example of the action. And here's the heavy rod I was using, the Dobbins. This is a fast action. And I would consider a fast action generally to be in 80-20. So if you see here, see how just the very last 4 or 5 guides is basically where it's bending, where I got a lot more rod here that is just backbone. That's a fast action. I would consider that an 80-20, which is 80% of the rod is mostly just backbone, not going to have much flex, much give in it. 20% is going to have your give, like the tip of the rod basically. And actions are basically from moderate slow would be like the lowest action, which would be the most bend in the entire rod. Think of that as like cranking rods and stuff, and then it would go to just a moderate to a fast to an extra fast, which an extra fast would be like a 90-10 is what I would consider it, to where just the very end of that rod is got the tip in it and is where you're going to get the flex. It's a pretty stout rod except for just the very, very tip. The last category of the rod is the length, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Most of my rods are 7 foot. I have some that are 7'6". I think I have 1 or 2 that's 7'10", and I have a couple that are just under 7 foot, like 6'8" for like jerk baits and things. But generally around the 7 foot to just say the 7'3" is going to be pretty standard for most techniques, and I'll kind of get into that later of why I like specific rod lengths for just certain applications. So now you're probably wondering why the rod manufacturers have all these different classifications and why you should really care. And the best analogy I have is golf. So in golf you have different clubs that help you hit the ball different distances, different angles on the club face to help you perform at your best ability of the game, and that's how fishing is. You get the correct rod as far as power, length, and action goes for the right technique you're using. It's going to help you cast better. It's going to help you get more bites as far as the presentation goes. It's going to help you set the hook and keep the fish buttoned up to get them in the boat. And it's also going to make it more enjoyable to fish because you're going to have a balanced rod. You're going to be set up for the technique, and it's just going to make it a much more enjoyable experience. Okay, now you start looking at rods. You're going to go online, you start looking around, and one of the first things you're going to notice is probably the price point. You're going to have rods that range anywhere from, oh, you may be able to get a really cheap casting rod for like 35, 40 bucks. Would be pretty much the bottom of the barrel, which I have one that's like that. I may have even paid less than that. And you're going to have them ranging all the way up to close to $600 if you get like a G Loomis NRX or something, which is top, you know, the spectrum basically. And then you have a Berkeley Cherrywood or a Berkeley Lightning rod, which is about the bottom of the spectrum. So you have a very large variation in price, and I'll go over kind of what you're getting at different price points and what's important, and at what point I think that you're mostly just paying for the name. As far as the price point goes, you're going to notice a few different things when you're looking at different levels of rods. And basically you have your main materials of your rods. You have your cork or your handle composition. This is cork. You can have EVA foam. You can have like a wind grip style. You're going to have your actual rod blank itself. You're going to have the guides. There's different brands of guides, different costs of guides. They can get very expensive, and that leads to a lot of sensitivity in your rod. And basically with your rods, to a certain extent, you're going to get what you pay for. So this is a Dobyns Champion Extreme HP. Very nice rod, retails for I think $330 or so. It is my jig rod. I wanted a very sensitive rod throwing a bottom contact bait so I can feel everything. But you're gonna notice when you pick up a more expensive rod or a higher end rod, when you actually are fishing with it, you're gonna have much better sensitivity. And that's coming from the blank and the guides, and then the reel seat, which is basically where your reel connects to your rod, is all going to help with your actual sensitivity. But there's going to be some other things that you're going to notice usually right away when you pick them up. And the biggest thing to me is weight. If you pick up a $350 rod and you pick up a $75 rod, you're immediately going to notice the weight difference. You're basically paying for a lighter blank that's more sensitive and is still tough, but it's just a lot lighter, and it's going to be a lot more pleasurable to throw that all day long. The next thing you're kind of paying for is the warranty. So different rod companies are going to have different warranties. Dobyns has a pretty good warranty. St. Croix has a really good warranty. G Loomis has a really good warranty. A lot of these higher end companies are going to have good warranties where if you did break your rod, even if you broke it, you know, you smashed it in your tailgate or something, or you stepped on it and you just, is your total fault that you broke it, you send them a fraction of the rod price and they'll hook you up and send you a brand new one. The final thing you're going to notice is the attention to detail within the rod. So you're going to have a lot more accent colors or smaller things in here that kind of set it apart. Like there's a little bit different graphics in here and inlays. You're going to have nicer cork if your rod has cork on it. This has like some Kevlar kind of wrapped in here, gives us some texture, different inlays around the guides. Basically it's going to be kind of some aesthetically pleasing type things. But then if you were to take the rod and you look all the way down it, all your guides should be straight as an arrow. There should be no guide turned. It should be perfectly in line when you're paying that much for a rod. So those are kind of some of the things you're going to notice. Here is a St. Croix Legend Tournament Bass, another very nice rod. This is like $275, I think. These are really good bang for your buck if you want to get into a higher end rod without spending too much. You know, they're made in the USA. St. Croix has an awesome warranty. I think this rod has a 15-year warranty on it, which is pretty hard to beat. Notice the cork, very smooth, not a lot of fillers in it. St. Croix uses the colored blanks on a lot of their higher end rods. This is blue. If you get like the Legend Elites, they're green, and the Extremes I think might be green too. Same thing, you look down them, should be straight as an arrow. You're gonna have just very lightweight rod. I will say some of the St. Croix I think are a little bit too tip heavy for me as far as balance goes, but that's something I'll get into here in a little bit. Now, here's a little bit lower class rod. This is, I would say, about the bottom of the barrel of a rod, but it is my topwater rod that I just throw poppers and spooks on, so I don't need a sensitive rod. I get away with it. This is basically just a black blank, which is fine, but they tried to make it red, and instead of the actual blank being that color, through the fibers, they just put this cheap wrap on there, and it flakes away and it looks horrible after a period of time. The cork, a lot of fillers in it. It cracks really bad and pits and gets chunks that fall out. The bottom of the handle actually broke. I had to put some tape on it to make it work, but you know what, it still gets the job done. So just know that if you're buying a high price rod or a low price rod, kind of what you're getting with that, and you are getting what you're paying for to an extent. Now, if you go out and buy a $600 rod, I can't say that you're going to notice too much difference between a $600 rod and a $300 rod, but you're going to notice a heck of a difference between a $600 rod and a $100 rod. And the same kind of goes for around the 300 mark compared to the $100 mark. The biggest thing you're going to notice is increased sensitivity and a decrease in weight, so it'll be a little bit more pleasurable for you to fish all day. So here's another rod I'll just kind of touch over real quick, and this is a Falcon Low Rider, kind of a mid-grade rod. Hundreds, low 100s I think is what I paid for it. Great rod I've been using for throwing buzz baits, flipping around docks and things. Great little rod. I have had no complaints. I kind of just bought it spontaneously at one time to try it out, and it's performed for me pretty well. But that does remind me something I want to talk about, and that is the actual power of the rods between different brands. My Dobbins, this is a heavy power rod. Falcon, heavy power rod. They are not equal. I would not call them equal. I think the Dobbins is rated a little bit on the lower side, which means their heavy action rod would be more like a medium heavy for a lot of different brands. Like a St. Croix, I think, is in line more with the Falcon, where this is a heavy rod and it's actually a little bit more stiff and feels like a heavy rod, where the heavy Dobbins rod feels a little bit more like a medium heavy in a lot of different brands. So that's something you kind of gotta figure out when you buy a rod and you find a brand that you like. All right, I'll dive into some of the technique specific rods, kind of what I call them, of what I have here. And we'll start off with the St. Croix. So this is the medium power, extra fast, 6'8", and I use this for jerk baits. I think that's what they actually, you know, have written on there, is jerk baits. You can see the action in this rod. It's mostly just in the very tip, which is what I want for jerk baits. I don't want the whole rod to be a big old sponge. I want just the tip to be moving so I can make this bait kind of dart back and forth quickly without covering much water, basically. So that is my jerkbait rod, something that I really like. I like those a ton. Now we'll go to another very specific rod. This is an eye rod. It's quite a bit bigger. I don't know if you can see that. Pretty big rod. This is a 7'10". They call it the Bama Rig Special. You know, it's rated for a 1 to 4 ounce as far as that goes, but the power I would just call it I'd probably call it extra heavy. And then this is a very moderate blank as far as the action goes. So this is a 10XD, so a big old crankbait, and you can bend this rod pretty far down in here, and that is really a pleasure when you're throwing a big crankbait like this. Bernie's interested in it, or you're throwing an A-rig, which is what I normally use this for. And then this summer I was like, oh well, you know what, I'm gonna try this rod for the crankbait. So this is a 7'10". When you start getting to these bigger rods that people are using to throw A-rigs, big crankbaits, glide baits, they're gonna give you this really long handle, so you can grab it and you can get a lot of mechanical advantage and load up that rod and sling those baits really far. That's what you need, especially on like crankbaits. You want this bait to go as deep as it can. Keep scrubbing on the bottom. The longer the cast you make, the deeper that bait's gonna go, the more time it's in the strike zone. And then the same thing with the glide baits. A lot of times, big kind of a long cast technique, sometimes stealthy in clear water. And then the A-rig, same thing. You can bomb the A-rig way past your target, let it sink down 10 feet, and then run it over top of the brush pile. you're gonna do a lot better. The iRod, I think, is $100 something, might be close to $200 because it's so long. And here's another example of a rod that I used for years with just my A-rig, and this is a Lew's TP1 speed stick. So this is actually a 7'6". It's a heavy and it is a fast action, and this works pretty good for A-rigs. You did have to put a little bit more effort to get the rig out there further because it's a fast action and the rod didn't load up quite as much to throw that heavy bait. So it was a little bit of a struggle. It wasn't quite as pleasurable to throw that as far as that goes. Now, here's my cranking rod. It's got the moderate blank on it. It's got a lot more load up into the rod itself. That's going to help you throw the crankbait further. It's going to help you keep the fish pinned on your treble hooks, especially if they're head shaking or they come up and do a little jumping. That moderate action, the rod's going to absorb a lot of the fish shaking, and it's going to help you keep the fish hooked up. This is a 7'6". I'm normally throwing up to 6XDs on it, but honestly getting a like 7'10" or 7'11" rod in like a medium heavy like this one would not be a bad idea to help get those baits out a little bit further. One of the final things I want to talk about is balance of the rod. So I'm going to take my rod. This is a spinning rod. All the things I've talked about basically apply the exact same to this. If I have a bait tied on it, I'm going to toss it out so there's no weight hanging off the ends, and I'm just going to sit here like I'm actually fishing, like I'm holding the rod, and see how it feels. I generally do not want my rods to lean forward really far like this. I call that tip heavy. That just annoys me. It just seems like it's extra work throughout the day. You're constantly trying to tip it back. That is something that I'm looking for, and with that being said, the price point does not always mean much in regards to balance. Like the St. Croix, super nice rod, $200 something price range, almost $300. Very, very nice rod. I'm just not a fan of the balance point. Other people might not agree with me. It's kind of a personal opinion as far as that goes. Another thing you'll notice, I'll use these two rods here as an example, which is the Dobbins and the Falcon, is the handle length itself. So I'm going to put the reels next to each other, and you can see this Falcon has a comparably shorter handle than the Dobbins. And you're probably wondering, well, why is that? Well, part of it is it can be geared a little bit towards the technique specific, like the jerkbait rod has a shorter handle, because if you got a long handle and you're running the jerkbait all day, that handle hits your shirt, hits inside your coat, and it's annoying. So that's can be part of it. You know, somebody factored that in when they're designing it. But I found a lot of it, I think, is just who designed the rod. So you get a lot of these companies like Falcon or St. Croix or Dobbins that have specific pro staff people or professionals that are designing their own line of rod, or they're basically putting a lot of the input into the company saying, hey, here's what I think we need, here's what I think we're missing, what we need to change, and they might prefer that handle, you know, and it's generally geared towards a specific technique of why they have that, but that's generally where it's coming from. So that's another thing you got to pay attention to when you're buying rods, is the handle length. Sometimes you want a little bit longer handle, and you like that to kind of get in your rib cage when you set the hook, and sometimes you have a little shorter handle. It kind of wants to pop out, and it seems like you don't get quite the hook set, you know, quite the advantage on them with that. Now, in regards to price, it's obviously kind of what you can afford and what you're willing to spend your money on. Now, I'll go over just what I personally have and what I've come up with as far as what I think is actually cost effective and where you should spend the money if you're saving up to buy some more expensive rods, you know, where you're going to benefit from that the most. So if you have the money and you want to buy all $300 rods, you know, find a good brand that you like, Dobbins, St. Croix, G. Loomis. They've even got more expensive rods than that. You know, feel free, buy all the expensive rods. It's going to be really pleasurable to fish with. You're going to enjoy them. It'll be cool, but it's not necessarily something that's needed for a lot of techniques. I have found that I'm willing to spend money on any rod that I'm going to be using, you know, for things that really, really need sensitivity. So bottom contact baits, more so in a little bit deeper water. You know, things like jigs, shaky heads, dragging other soft plastics out in deeper water, main leg points, or just things in deeper water, fishing through brush, where I really think that sensitivity can help, where I can tell exactly where that bait's at. I can tell just where it's dragging over. I can tell I'm in a little bit of mud or small rock bottom, and boom, I get right to that transition where it was kind of pea gravelly type feeling, and now I can feel it kind of clumping over some bigger rocks. Okay, that's where I'm gonna spend the money on the nice rod, and that it's just the sensitivity factor is basically what I'm after. So as far as like moving baits or fishing shallower around docks or just flipping other areas, I think you're kind of wasting your money spending $300 on these real expensive rods. Yes, they're going to be nice, but they're not necessarily needed. So some of my recommendations of what I really like, what I would use, this is a Dobyns Sierra. This is like a $160 rod maybe. These are really nice rods. I also really like the Dobyns Fury. They're very, very similar to this. They used to be 100 or just under 100, and I think they raised them to like 120 now. They're basically the same as this, minus instead of the cork down here, they're going to have foam, and this part is cork still, I believe, on the Dobyns Fury. But those are really nice, good for like moving baits or pitching and flipping in shallower areas. You're going to feel the bite, or you're going to see your line moving. You don't necessarily need that really expensive rod for that. I really like the Falcon Low Rider, pretty cheap. It's done everything I've needed to. I've boat flipped 5-pounders with it, haven't broken the rod. You're not really supposed to do that, so it's not on the rod if it does break when you do that, but it's held up really well for me. It's got good sensitivity. It does have a little bit shorter handle, which sometimes I don't like, but sometimes I do like when I'm fishing a little bit tighter quarters. So I feel like it's not hitting my side as much like when I'm flipping and stuff. So that's something to kind of look into. As far as some of the my higher end rods, like my drop shot rod using up north or whenever I'm fishing smaller plastics around here, Dobyns Champion Extreme HP. I love these rods, very, very sensitive, very light, very balanced. Same with my jig rod, bottom contact baits. So that's where I'm putting the money. And then same thing with my jerkbait rod. And I actually, the story on this rod is I bought my first one from somebody for really cheap, like $100 for almost a $300 rod, because he was getting out of bass fishing, and that rod actually broke. The line got stuck in a trolling motor, and it took the rod and just snapped it. And called St. Croix, told him what happened. I sent him, I think, can't remember if it was 20 bucks, maybe I sent him 80 bucks or something, and got a brand new rod. And they were like, well, what do you want? And the old one was a 7-foot medium, and I told them I wanted a 6'8" for the jerk baits, and they hooked me up. So that's how I kind of got that nicer rod for the jerk baits. But I do like that for the jerk baits because there are times dead sticking that jerk bait, just letting it sit there, and you can kind of come up, or you feel fish just come up and like breathe on it almost, and that is really nice. But also with live scope, I don't know if it's necessary anymore, because I can shine it right on my jerk bait and see it, and I can actually watch the fish come right up to it. So you can get away with the cheaper rod in that regard. Now I feel like I have to recommend Old Trusty, the Berkley Cherrywood or Berkley Lightning rod, but I would only recommend this for topwater. I would not really get this for any other type of technique. Maybe you could do like spinner baits or some sort of moving bait, but I think it excels at topwater. Some other good brands or rods is St. Croix, like the lower end ones in the $150 range are really, really good. They got the warranty. I've used both Dobyns and St. Croix warranty, and they've been really good to me, so I have no complaints in that regard. But there are seriously so many good rod manufacturers out there. Maybe don't limit yourself to just one right away unless you really, really like them. But something I would recommend is if you're kind of experimenting with some of these different rods, and you're going on Tackle Warehouse or wherever, and you're reading reviews, and you maybe find something that you like, I would recommend going to Bass Boat Central, make an account on there, and there is a area that's rods for sale and like personal tackle and stuff for sale, and you can go on there and there'll be people that are tournament fishermen that are unloading rods from the year. They might be pro staff people, or maybe they use the rods for like 2 years, and they're going to be selling some of these rods that are retailing for $300 or more. You can pick them up for 150 bucks, and that's a great way to try rods, especially some of the higher end rods. And if you don't like it, you can turn around and sell it. And instead of having a $300 rod that's brand new that you used once, and it's like a car, now you're trying to sell it for $250 because you took it out and you used it. You can instead basically buy a rod that has depreciated already to basically its threshold. It's not really going to go too much cheaper than that, and you can buy it, try it. If you don't like it, the worst you do is pay for shipping to send it to somebody else. It's a whole lot cheaper to do that, to experiment with stuff, than it is to keep going and buying brand new rods. But that's just a suggestion, something that I've learned over the years to try and figure out what I like. As far as getting some rods that are kind of do everything, I would really recommend getting a 7-foot medium heavy, and maybe like a 7-foot or 7'3" heavy, and then probably a crankbait rod, so somewhere between, just say 7'6", between a medium to a medium heavy that's got a little bit more of a moderate action to throw the crankbaits on, and then recommend some spinning reel, either a medium or medium light, and that'll pretty much get your bases covered for most fishing. Hopefully this helps you understand the somewhat confusing rod industry and help you streamline you picking your rod and the things that are best for you, and help you be a better fisherman and ultimately catch more fish. So hope this helped, and thanks for watching, guys. We'll have more videos coming out here soon, and our video giveaway I think we're going to try and do this coming week to at least get the video rolling and get some things going. We'll be giving some rods away, hats and stickers, little things like that, bait packages. So stay tuned for that, and thanks a lot, guys.